يقدم لكم هذا البرنامج برعاية مجمع مدار.
In today's episode, we delve into the ongoing state visit of President Abdelmajid Tebboune of Algeria to Beijing, China. The visit, upon the invitation of Chinese President Xi Jinping, marks a crucial milestone in the relations between the two nations. During his stay, President Tebboune met with Chinese Premier Li Qiang and Chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, Zhao Leji, highlighting the significance of these engagements. Join us as we analyze the discussions on bilateral cooperation, mutual support, infrastructure projects, and the future of Algeria-China strategic relations. Stay tuned for a comprehensive and insightful debate on this important diplomatic endeavor. This is All 24 News special coverage. Good evening and welcome to our special coverage on All 24 News. As mentioned earlier, today we focus on the ongoing state visit of Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune to Beijing. This visit, initiated by the invitation of President Xi Jinping, holds great significance for the bilateral relations between Algeria and China. President Tebboune's engagement have included on its third day crucial meetings with Chinese Premier Li Qiang and Chairman Zhao Leji. The discussions have emphasized the strength of the Algerian-Chinese relations, highlighting mutual assistance and support. Algeria aims to advance as a military, economic, and diplomatic power in Africa, seeking Chinese expertise in various fields. Infrastructure projects such as the construction of an electric car battery factory further demonstrate the commitment to cooperation. China, in turn, seeks to establish a new beginning in the relations between the two nations. Let's introduce our esteemed guests for tonight's debate, who will share their insights and perspectives on this significant diplomatic visit. We are joined live by Professor Zubair Yahya, Professor of International Studies and Director of Research in Geopolitics at Kedge Business School from Marseille. And from Washington is Professor Edmund Gharib, Professor of International Relations at Georgetown University. We also have Mr. Mark Lowe, International Relations Expert from Genoa, Italy. And from Beijing is Liu Kun, CGTN radio anchor and former Washington correspondent with China Media Group. Thank you, gentlemen and ma'am, for agreeing to be with us. Let me start with you here, Professor Edmund Gharib. How do you find the discussed key areas of cooperation between Algeria and China during President Tebboune's visit in general?
Greetings to you and your honored guests. Clearly, this is an important visit. It's a historic visit between two countries which have a great deal in common. Yes, there are different sizes. China is one of the largest and one of the most powerful countries in the world. But Algeria is also a major player in the region and in the world, in the Arab world, in Africa, and on the international scene. They have a lot of common positions, common views on international issues. Both would like to see this, for example, President Tebboune expressed his support for the Chinese initiatives, the question of global security initiative, the global civilization initiative, and the global security initiative, and as well as cooperation in a number of areas. But more importantly, I think what we have seen is that the two countries are very much interested in achieving a more balanced, more just international system and international order, a little bit different from the order which existed for the last several decades, especially since the collapse of the Soviet Union. A kind of relationship and international order that's going to be based on the UN Charter, on non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries, on multilateralism instead of unilateralism, and on how we are going to create a more open, a more kind of society and world where we see a system that's going to try to work. Of course, it will not be perfect. There will always be problems, but a more just system that will also take the interests of the smaller countries into account, and that where the bigger countries are not going to dominate the weaker and the smaller countries. I think this is a very important development, this kind of cooperation, and we see this as also manifested in other ways, for example, through the creation of new international organizations, whether it's the BRICS that Algeria wants to become a member of, aspires to become a member, and China has supported its request, its appeal that it supports Algeria. I think these countries, the Shanghai Organization and a number of other regional and international organizations that are going to create a more balanced kind of environment, regional and international environment. This is, of course, on top of everything else where the two countries are cooperating together in investment in the areas of trade, in terms of science, in terms of space, in terms of the energy, whether it's that oil and gas, or even where basically Chinese as well as Algerian oil and gas companies working together. In addition to also nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, these are very important developments that we are seeing today, and that are likely to help strengthen not only the ties between the two countries, but which may also serve as a model for other countries in relations between countries in Africa, the Arab world, with China, or with Russia, and with other parties on the world scene.
Let me just include Professor Zubair Yahya here. Professor, what specific areas of cooperation, according to you, are expected to contribute to Algeria's economic development and regional standing? In other words, how can China expertise or Chinese expertise contribute to Algeria's advancements in military, economic, and diplomatic power in Africa?
Yes. In the military, I start with the military, which is a sensitive subject, and we don't always know much about its content. But China has already made advances in terms of its military cooperation with Algeria, which has increased in recent years, but it's still in the domain of purchases of sophisticated weaponry from China. China now is, after Russia, Germany and China are second or third in terms of suppliers of military equipment to Algeria. But I think what the Algerians are looking for is more into the manufacturing sector and into the transfer of technology. The other sectors that Algeria has spoken about and that President Tebboune has insisted on is the area of minerals, like the case of Gara Jabilat, with the exploitation of those of the iron ore, which will be helpful to both Algeria and China, because Gara Jabilat has been dormant for 3 or 4 decades, since the 1970s. And China, which imports most of its iron ore from Australia, is very interested in that one, and for the Algerians as well, which want to lessen their dependency on the oil rent. This is quite important. The other sector is the phosphates, especially in the area of fertilizers and so on. And so in both countries would be interested, although China is the largest producer of phosphate, but Algeria can become is actually the third or fourth producer of phosphate. And of course, the other sector that is really, really important these days is in the renewables, sustainable development, renewable energies, in which China has been involved. So Natrag and many Chinese companies have entered agreements, for the exploitation or for the establishment of systems such as the photovoltaic systems in the Algerian desert, which has plenty of sunshine, and there could be also the transformation of electrical systems and so on and so forth. So there are plenty of sectors. I mean, the sky is the limit because Algeria has many needs, and one of the models that Algeria could adopt is the one on the health, like the production of vaccines that had begun a couple of years ago. The factory that was set up in Constantine, I believe. So there are many areas of cooperation, and they extend just like the satellites, satellites for not just for military purposes, but satellites for agriculture and other sectors.
Yes.
And research, of course, academic research and others that we can talk about later.
Thank you indeed. Let me just include here Mr. Marclot. Mr. Marclot, how can Algeria diversify its economy through its strategic partnership with China in general, and what potential benefits can Algeria expect from cooperating with China in mining, exploitation and industrial development, according to you?
Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for inviting me to the special this evening. And it's, as always, a pleasure to participate. As regards your specific question, I think in reality, the professor has already anticipated the largest part of the answer, in the sense that there is a lot of experience and technology that can be exported from China to Algeria that will greatly benefit a number of different sectors, including mining. In terms of industrial development, China has, as we all are very, very well aware, an absolutely enormous amount of experience in numerous industrial sectors. So the know-how, the technology, and the ability to oversee development projects, the building of plants, the building of factories, the running of factories, the maintenance of factories, etc., would be very, very beneficial to Algeria. The professor also mentioned the issue of renewable energy, and in particular solar energy, a field in which China has made massive steps ahead and is one of the leaders in the production of photovoltaic panels. So that is another area where China could bring in a lot of technology that will be of use to Algeria's developing industries, in as much as supplying power is no great problem. You have more hydrocarbon resources than many other countries. So it's not an issue of a lack of energy sources. It's an issue of transition and transitioning towards a greener, a more sustainable energy system. So without a shadow of doubt, the industrial sector of renewable energy, and specifically solar power, is very, very important. I would also add e-commerce. Algeria has been cited on a number of occasions as being considered one of the Middle East and North Africa's fastest growing e-commerce markets. So this is another area where China has a lot of experience that can be brought into Algeria. Let us not forget that Algeria has a very large young population, which is well educated, and you have a situation where modern economies, modern industries are of great interest to young people, and the experience that can be brought in from China in this specific field are very, very valuable indeed. So in terms of how can the two countries work together, basically to assist the development of Algeria's industries and economies, there are a great number of sectors, and it will be very, very interesting to see which develops the fastest.
Indeed. Thank you so much. And let me just include here Ms. Kun Liu. How can the visit of President Tebboune to China, according to you, serve as a new starting point for the relations between the two countries?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on this panel. It's a great honor for me. It's a good question that you raised the issue of a new starting point, because a lot of people may not know that the friendship between China and Algeria actually go way back. China was the first non-Arab country that recognized Algeria back in 1958. And the first overseas medical expert team that China has ever sent was to Algeria. That was in 1963, if my memory serves me correct. And also, Algeria was among the group of countries that supported firmly the restoring the UN membership of the People's Republic of China back in 1971. And also, Algeria was among the first group of nations that recognized, supported, and joined the Belt and Road Initiative. So it's a great deal. And President Tebboune's visit is a great deal for Beijing and for the Chinese people. This trip could be serving as a new starting point, because they not only renewed their older promises, the traditional friendship, but also in the joint communique, as well as in the remarks made by leaders of both sides, they have stated new commitments. For example, the things that I've mentioned, which I think are of great importance for both sides, is that they tried to cooperate on things that will be mutually beneficial to them and also in line with their national ambitions. For example, they reaffirmed that they will try to find merging points in the vision of new Algeria by the Algerian government, as well as projects in the Belt and Road Initiative. And another thing is that the Algerian president talked with the Chinese president about the ambition of Algeria to join the BRICS mechanism, which is a great deal, because both Algeria and China belong to the developing world and the emerging markets. There's a great need for them to cooperate and to voice more support for the developing world as well as for the emerging markets, and to welcome Algeria, a strong economy in Africa, into the BRICS family will be beneficial for both of them. So I think the friendship between the two sides actually go way back. This is a traditional friendship, but also this trip by President Tebboune not only helped the Chinese people to better understand Algeria, the country, for Chinese businessmen to better understand the country, but also have brought the relationship between the two sides to a new level.
Thank you indeed. And Professor Edmund Garib, I get back to you with this question. What measures, according to you, can be taken to strengthen the parliamentary, for example, cooperation and exchange between the National People's Congress of China and Algeria?
There's no doubt that I think there is a great deal that they could benefit from each other's experiences and as well as cooperation. But I think that one of the things that probably is going to be taking place is that, from what I've read, is that there's going to be a change in terms of some of the Algerian laws, for example, and maybe some of your guests can correct me if I am wrong on this, that, for example, to allow people who are not Algerians or foreigners to buy property in Algeria. In addition to that, there is going to be a great deal of trying to work together to, I think the more important thing is to collaborate and cooperate on for example, the advocation of how to settle conflicts, both countries could play an important role in that area. Both parliaments could play a role in that area. They could, for example, dialogue could be emphasized to settle conflicts. So instead of having war and or terrorism, for that matter, we see at least cooperation, we see dialogue to resolve problems, and a new international order. I think that's very important. And one of the other things that I found very interesting, that I think I heard from your guest in China, was very interesting. The idea about the recognition that took place by China. China, as she mentioned, and that I knew that this is the first time was a non-Arab country recognized the provisional government of Algeria, the revolutionary government. But something I heard, and I interviewed one time the late Mohammad Yazid when he was ambassador in Lebanon. And he said that there are two things that were interesting. One was that this wasn't, while it's true, this was the first time there was recognition. Nevertheless, contacts were established at the Bandung Conference in 1955. And that, for me, that was really very interesting at that time. And more important, also, that apparently later on, I don't know which year, I don't remember exactly when, that Mao Zedong, the leader of China, offered to train and arm as many as 200,000 Algerians in their struggle. And later on, and then I learned something new today about the doctors, for example, that again, your guest from China. I think this shows that there is a historic relationship. There is a great deal of perhaps respect and affection. I mean, when there were many doctors who basically treated, I don't know how many Algerians when they came from, and when there were not many doctors probably in Algeria at that time as French doctors and probably other European doctors left. So this is a new opportunity, I think, to build on that kind of historic relationship, and whether it's in the area of the One Road, One Belt initiative, or in the area of transfer of technology. That's something that's very important for Algeria. You don't want to just basically buy goods from China, but you want to be able to develop and build your own. So I think there are a number of areas where this cooperation is very significant. But I think the most important is that also both countries have shown some sympathy and understanding for the other's concerns, whether it comes to terms of security or in terms of certain issues. For example, both countries have expressed support for a just and lasting settlement of the Palestinian conflict, that you cannot have unless the Palestinians have self-determination. You cannot have peace. So this is one example. The support that President Thabboune showed also toward the Chinese position on Xinjiang and on Taiwan. I think these are also likely to bring the two countries together, and maybe perhaps we'll see more cooperation on the regional level as well.
Absolutely. Time shall tell. But here I would like to hear the opinion of Professor Zubair Yahya. When it comes to the increased coordination, how can this be done? I mean, increasing coordination and close cooperation between Algeria and China, especially in the United Nations Security Council, and how can they benefit the two sides, I mean, from each other's expertise in resolving international issues in general?
Well, the Algerians and the Chinese share a lot of common views on international politics, mostly the fact that both wanted a more democratic international system, a more multilateral system, the application of international law, the rejection of abuse of the imposition of sanctions that very often are not legal, and so on and so forth. And obviously the influence that both can have on the global south, of the countries of the global south. So there could be a lot of cooperation in that extent, especially since Algeria has been voted into the United Nations Security Council as a non-voting, non-veto member. So I think there is plenty of room for cooperation there. And don't forget, Algeria has played historically an extremely important role as a mediator in a lot of conflicts, whether it was the resolution of the US-Iran hostage situation, the Eritrean, Ethiopian case, plenty of cases that Algeria has played. And now China, which abstained in the past from getting too involved in mediation, which my co-author and I, Professor Sun Degang and myself, we coined the term of quasi-mediation diplomacy that China applied, whereas Algeria was and is a real mediator. So China has shown that it could play the role of mediator like it did in the Iran-Saudi Arabia normalization, the reinstatement of diplomatic relations. So I think there's a lot of room for cooperation between the two in the different multilateral settings. Professor Gharib has just mentioned the question of Xinjiang and the refusal of Algeria and China to politicize the questions of human rights and such other things. And so they both abide by those principles of non-interference in domestic affairs of other states, and the mutual respect and so on and so forth. And I think that Algeria too shares that notion of sharing the common destiny, human destiny that China has come up with. So there is a lot of room for cooperation. And by the way, if you allow me, I'll add something, because Professor Gharib talked about the medical mission. The medical mission didn't end in 1963. It's still in Algeria. The 27th batch has arrived not long ago, and I don't have the exact figures, but there have been more than 1 million babies who were delivered by those missions, and now there are some very interesting. I mean, the traditional Chinese medicine is available for Algerians in various hospitals. As information, and it's the health cooperation is extremely important. And when you talked about the lack of doctors in Algeria, there were less than 200 doctors throughout the country. At that time, Algeria had the population of about 10 million people, and so China came to the rescue. It was the first overseas mission, Chinese overseas mission, and then it multiplied later, where the Chinese are present in Mauritania, Tunisia, and other places.
Very interesting insights indeed. And let me get back to Professor Edmond Gharib before he leaves us. How can the comprehensive strategic relations, Professor Edmond Gharib, between Algeria and China be further developed and strengthened? And in what ways can Algeria utilize China's capabilities to benefit its economic growth?
I think what we are seeing, I mean, these agreements that we have just heard about, there are something like close to 20 or I think 19 agreements that were made to the transfer of technology is one of the most important. Especially this is very important for Algeria because of what happens sometimes, that what we have seen in the past from some of the Western countries, they basically would like to sell product, but they are not willing to transfer technology. That's something that's extremely important, I think, and essential. And we've heard from several of your guests about this, the areas of cooperation in agriculture and building the infrastructure. I've read that, for example, the Chinese are playing an important role in the port of Al-Hamdaniya and in railroads, for example. This is something that Algeria needs very much, and to expand to this, what we have heard about the development that the ongoing development, the area of cooperation in science and technology. That's extremely important, especially in this world that we're seeing dramatic changes. Now we're all hearing a lot about artificial intelligence. Some people are very much in support of it. Some people are worried about it. But I think it's likely to be a fact. And I think this might be where both countries and others can cooperate. Sustainable urban development is very important for Algeria, and I think it's China also by investing, by having some of its engineers, sometimes workers cooperating. I think that would also help them. The idea of trade is very significant. Aerospace cooperation, I think this is something that both sides have expressed support for and interest in. The area of agriculture, the area of energy that we've heard about from several of the honorable guests, education, sports. I've heard that one of the Algerian ministers also wanted to talk about Algerian cinema and making sure that the people in China are familiar with Algerian cinema and which has been, by the way, very impressive in the past. What Algerian cinema is amazing. So I think there are so many different areas that both countries can cooperate. And I think that for me, what's very important is that we are seeing the world is being formed anew. And we don't know exactly how it's going to end, what the kind of a
Thank you indeed, Professor Edmond Gharib.
shape we are going to see the new international order. So that's why it's important that we see this kind of cooperation.
Very clear. Thank you indeed, Professor Edmond Gharib. You are live with us from Washington. Let me get back to you here, Mr. Mark Lowe. How does China view Algeria's role in the North African region and its position in the Arab, African, and Mediterranean context?
Just very, very quickly, and going back to what your other guests mentioned on a number of occasions, cooperation between Algeria and China going back to the 1950s is very, very interesting indeed. And what I find particularly interesting, and given this very important visit, extremely valid, is this concept of from basically having moved from anti-imperialistic politics to collaboration in the fields of economic development, industrial development, diplomatic cooperation, and so forth. The other issue that the professor mentioned just a moment ago was technology transfer, which again is something absolutely essential, and as he quite rightly pointed out, the vast majority of European companies that have an involvement in Algeria tendentially sell a product or sell a service. There is very, very little in terms of technology transfer. And technology transfer is absolutely essential, especially when we consider how many intelligent, well-educated young people there are in Algeria. That said, how does China view Algeria? First and foremost, I would say that China views Algeria, today's Algeria, as a stable democracy. They see Algeria as being a country with enormous potential, a country that maintains good relations with a number of European nations, Italy, for example. And just let me open and close very quickly parenthesis. One of the first and one of the key Italian players in Algeria was Ente Nazionale Idrocarburi, Eni, basically. Eni has, as of the 1950s, its own news agency, AGI. And AGI was very, very supportive of influencing Italian public opinion in favor of Algeria's battle for independence. So just to close a parenthesis there, talking about how other countries have supported Algeria in the past. This relationship with Italy is still very, very strong. It's become even stronger since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. As we're all very, very well aware, Algeria has guaranteed quite dramatic increase in its hydrocarbon exports to Italy, and therefore Italy acting as a hub towards a number of other European countries. And this is very, very positive. There is an increased level of interest in Algeria on part of a number of European nations. But going back specifically to China, China also views Algeria as a bridge to a number of other African countries where there is no particular Chinese influence in this moment. And let's not forget something else that's very, very important. Algeria is a member of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which basically means that any company that is fast enough and intelligent enough to set up business in Algeria, and there is ever greater interest in this due to the fact that the 5149 law was revoked, and so apart from in some very particular sectors, strategic or critical sectors, a company the majority of an Algerian company can be owned by a foreign party. So all of this is coming together and making Algeria very interesting to Chinese investment.
Back to you, Ms. Conliu. What role can Algeria play in supporting China's global decisions, and how can this mutual support be enhanced in general? And according to you, what ways can China support Algeria's aspirations for further development and progress, and vice versa?
Now, before I answer your question, I want to respond very briefly to what the other guests have mentioned. As Professor Harib has mentioned, the affection between Chinese and Algerian people actually goes back to the 1950s because leaders of Asian and African countries at that time agreed at the Bandung Conference in Indonesia on the five principles of peaceful coexistence. And I think that was the root or the origin of today's China-Africa relations. And also for the medical team that I mentioned, and Professor Yahya expressed interest. Well, the actual number was that since 1963, China has sent over 27 dispatches of medical experts to Africa. In together, that would be 3,300 medical experts, meaning doctors. So that's that. But to answer your question, the role that Algeria can play in supporting China's global initiatives is very important for China. And China views Algeria as an important partner in Africa as well as in the Arab world because two very important, let's say three very important initiatives that China want the participation and the support from Algeria are the Global Development Initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, and the last one would be the Global Security Initiative. Actually, I think the essence of the GDI, the Global Development Initiative, and the Belt and Road Initiative are essentially the same because they focus on development. And this is something that fits into the aspiration of both countries because infrastructure development and infrastructure building is more like the basis of economic growth for a certain country. China has experience in that, and I think Algeria needs that. The two sides have already had ample experiences in terms of infrastructure projects. For example, China helped to build big mosques in Algeria, and China helped build highways and railways in Algeria. And this can also be reflected in China's support for Algeria to join the BRICS mechanism. As for the Global Security Initiative, I think both China and Algeria advocate a more comprehensive as well as balanced security landscape, a security architecture, not only in the Eurasian continent in terms of against the background of the Russia-Ukraine war, but also in the Africa and Middle East region. And as some of the guests have mentioned, China successfully mediated between Saudi Arabia and Iran just a few months ago in Beijing, in restoring diplomatic relations between the two. I think that showed the willingness and also the efforts that China will make in terms of bringing, a peaceful and more steady security situation in Middle East. I think that will be in the benefit of Algeria as well.
Perfect. And speaking of that, I will get back to Professor Zubair Yahya to tell us how will China's support for the UN-led process to resolve the Western Sahara issue be reflected at the international scene, and how might this position affect regional dynamics in North Africa as a whole?
China has taken a different path as far as the Western Sahara is concerned. It has kept at best a neutral position, calling for a peaceful resolution, because it has important interests in Morocco as well. So it has never really gotten involved in that issue, but at the United Nations Security Council, most of the time, it has abstained on the conflict. So, but as I said earlier, this involvement of China with conflict resolution or mediation is relatively new. The most obvious case, of course, is Iran and Saudi Arabia, because both have a comprehensive strategic partnership with China. And so China could not go on forever of playing middle of the road between two close strategic allies who are at war. And of course, the local players also had their say. Both Iran and Saudi Arabia had an interest in having that kind of mediation. It served their own purposes for development, or for, in the case of Iran, to break isolation and so on and so forth. And now China apparently is interested in resolving, or at least getting involved in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, has offered its services, and so we'll see. But as far as Western Sahara, my personal opinion is that China has taken a neutral position, avoided any involvement in the conflict, or in the except at the United Nations Security Council in terms of voting. Most of the time, it has been abstention.
Perfect. And Mr. Marquio, what about you? How do you find the shared positions of Algeria and China regarding the Palestinian issue, for instance, and the establishment of an independent Palestinian state? And something, maybe an extra question into that, is how do Algeria and China reinforce each other's commitment to safeguarding sovereignty and territorial integrity?
As concerns the Palestinian issue, nobody, unless they are insane, wants to see the situation continuing any longer. It's not good for anybody. It's very, very dramatic, very horrific, very, very damaging scenario that requires a solution. Algeria has always been very, very clear as to the country and the various governments' positions. So let's call it the country's position. China has begun to express an interest in Palestine. Were I to be critical of this, I would reason in terms of the rebuilding of Palestine. The Gaza Strip, the West Bank, the country is absolutely on its knees. There's practically nothing there. It's a country that needs to be created from zero. So in terms of infrastructure, as a starting point, there are massive amounts of investment that are required. Close parenthesis on that one. China has very much done a U-turn on its long-standing policy of non-interference. Now, quite how respectful China has been over the decades in regards to non-interference is another issue, but it's another issue for another day. The simple fact of the matter is that China has now decided that it is a global economic leader and it has to become a leading diplomatic power. China has a great wish to be involved in peacemaking. China has a great wish to be involved in deal making. One of the principal reasons why there is a lot of support for Algeria's long-term commitment to the Palestinian question is the fact that while on other fronts, for example, the Saudi and the Iranian negotiations, China had the tools that enabled them to assist, to be the middleman, to assist in the negotiations with both Israel and the Palestinian state. There are no tools available to the Chinese, none at all, and therefore any support that can be given to others that do have the instruments and the possibility to influence the future between these two countries, if it is well supported by China, will be in any case to China's advantage, in as much as China will in any case be perceived as having played a role in creating some form of order, being involved in peacemaking, being involved in rebuilding, but above all, bringing an end to a horrible conflict that has been going on far, far too long. But I repeat, as specifically regards the Palestinian issue, to the best of my knowledge, China has very few at best tools and instruments that would allow Beijing to be in any fashion influential. The same cannot be said for Algeria, and therefore Algeria can count upon China's continuous support.
Mm-hmm. Thank you indeed. Ms. Con Liu, how do you find the acknowledgement and praise of China to Algeria's vital role in supporting stability, development and peace in Africa in general, I'm saying, particularly its efforts in peacefully resolving crises in Libya, Mali, the Sahel region and Western Sahara?
Yeah, as one of the panelists have said, Algeria is one of the most important mediating power in the region, and I don't have to say more, to add to that. But the region where Algeria is located, the Middle East as well as the North African region, has gone through, different kinds of wars or conflicts in the past few decades, and certainly, the people in the region have suffered, and such kind of situation is certainly not in the interest of China.
Well, it seems that we're having
China because
it seems that the internet is kind of spotting. Let me include Professor Zubair Yahya just quickly, just to wrap up our special coverage for today. Professor Yahya, how do you see the, let's say, convergence of views regarding the commitment of the two countries in preserving each other's or safeguarding each other's integrity, territorial integrity in general, and the one China policy here?
Yes. Again, the colleague Liu Qiu was right in saying we have to always go back to 1955 to those principles of peaceful coexistence, and one of those principles is the non-interference in other countries' domestic affairs, and the both China or many countries around the world, in the global south in particular, they're very Westphalian. In other words, the protection of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of their nations. So there is a clear position on both sides, which was reiterated in the joint statement, by the way, by President Tebboune and President Xi Jinping. So there is that sense that, and again, we go back to the new world that is emerging, the new world order that is emerging, which rejects, these foreign interventions and the use of military force to to resolve conflicts and so on. And there is a convergence, a real convergence between China's political positions and Algeria's political positions with respect to the international system, which they both want to see being transformed. Algeria started in 1973 with the new international economic order to have a more balanced world and helping the countries in the developing countries and so on and so forth, and emphasizing development rather than some other political issues. So they're both seeing, in fact, China has raised this new international economic order, this helping Africa and other countries in the global south in building their infrastructure and creating this connectivity. I think we haven't talked about connectivity, and you asked the question about how the Chinese view Algeria. Algeria is the largest country in Africa. It has 1,200 kilometers of coastline, and the Hamdaniya that Mr. Lowe talked about, the port of Seychelles in Hamdaniya can be something very important for the maritime Silk Road, and Algeria is, in a sense, a part of an important connectivity with Africa, and this is why this trans-Saharan highway of 4,800 kilometers, which goes from Algiers to Lagos and has branches.
Thank you so much, Professor Zubair Yahya, for all these insights. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Thank you all, my dear panel of guests, for all these readings and analysis. And thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on our channel. With this, we reach the end. Join us again tomorrow for more updates and analysis. Take care.
قدم لكم هذا البرنامج برعاية مجمع مدار.